In the spring of 1961, a man named Clarence Whitfield sang in a prison choir in Huntsville, Texas, and was heard by someone who was not supposed to be listening. Clarence was 33 years old. He had been at the Texas State Penitentiary for 4 years, serving a 7-year sentence for a conviction that he had, on the evidence, reason to dispute, though the appeal process had not found in his favor. He had been singing since childhood, in the Shiloh Baptist Church in Houston, where he had grown up, in high school, where he had been the lead voice of every choral group that would take him, in the nightclubs and honky-tonks and the small gospel circuit where he had tried, in his 20s, to build something from what he had. The prison choir at Huntsville was not a formal program. It was organized by a chaplain named Father Bernard, who believed that group singing had rehabilitative value and who had, with modest resources and significant persistence, built a weekly choir practice that approximately 20 inmates attended. The person who was not supposed to be listening was a man named Arthur Pennington. Arthur Pennington was a music producer from New York who had come to Huntsville for a professional reason that had nothing to do with the prison. He was visiting a former colleague who worked at the state corrections office. His colleague had offered to show him around. The tour of the facility had, by accident of timing and route, passed the chapel at the moment Father Bernard's choir was rehearsing. Arthur Pennington stopped walking. He listened for approximately 4 minutes through the closed chapel door. Then he opened the door and went in. Father Bernard described this interruption in a letter he wrote to his diocese superior in 1961. He was not pleased. He wrote that a man in a business suit had opened the door to the chapel mid-rehearsal and stood there listening with an expression he described as entirely inappropriate to the setting. Father Bernard asked the man to leave. The man said he would in a moment. He continued listening. He was listening to Clarence Whitfield. Clarence was singing the baritone part of a gospel arrangement of Deep River. He was singing it, according to Father Bernard's letter, with the specific quality that Clarence always brought to whatever he sang, a fullness that the setting could not diminish, a presence that operated independent of the circumstances around it. Arthur Pennington left the chapel after 5 minutes. He found a way, through the corrections office contact, to speak to Clarence. He asked Clarence if he had ever performed professionally. Clarence told him. The nightclubs, the gospel circuit, the years before. Arthur asked how long he had left on his sentence. Clarence said 3 years. Arthur gave him his card. "When you're out," Arthur said, "call me." He left. Clarence served the remaining 3 years. He was paroled in June 1964. He was 36 years old. He did not call Arthur Pennington immediately. He described why in an interview he gave to a Houston music journalist in 1978. He said he had been carrying the card for 3 years, and that across those 3 years it had taken on a quality he did not trust. It had become hope. And hope, in his experience, was something that required careful handling. Something that, if held too tightly, broke things when it failed to arrive. He went home to Houston first. He found work, construction, then driving. He sang at Shiloh Baptist on Sundays. He gave himself 3 months to decide what the card meant. In September 1964, he called. Arthur Pennington answered on the second ring. He remembered Clarence immediately. He said, "Come to New York." Clarence came. What followed was not a fairy tale in the conventional sense. There was no immediate breakthrough, no overnight transformation, no single moment where everything changed and the story became simple. What happened was slower and more real. Arthur Pennington introduced Clarence to the New York gospel circuit. He introduced him to producers who worked in the Broadway rehearsal community. He connected him to voice coaches and conductors and the specific network of serious musical professionals who populated the margins of a city that ran on performance. In 1967, Clarence Whitfield was cast in the ensemble of a Broadway musical. Not a lead, not a featured role, a member of an ensemble of 12 singers. He was 39 years old. He had been out of prison for 3 years. He had a conviction record. He had been singing professionally, in one form or another, since he was 20. He stood on a Broadway stage and sang. The show ran for 14 months. He was in every performance. After the show closed, he was offered another, a larger role, an ensemble lead. He turned it down. He went back to Houston. The interviewer who spoke to him in 1978 asked why. She had expected the answer to be about family, about the difficulty of New York, about the practical realities of a life lived between two cities. Clarence thought about it. He said New York had given him something he had needed. He said the Broadway stage had shown him that the voice he had, the voice he had carried through Houston and the gospel circuit and 4 years in Huntsville and 3 more years of waiting, was sufficient, was more than sufficient. He said he had needed to know that, and having known it, he could go home. He sang at Shiloh Baptist for 30 more years. He directed the choir there from 1975 until 1998. He ran youth music programs at 3 Houston community centers. He taught choir at a high school for 11 years. He died in 2011. He was 83 years old. Arthur Pennington outlived him. He was told about Clarence's death by a mutual contact and described his reaction in a brief note he wrote that same day. He said he had known, when Clarence turned down the second Broadway show and went home, that it was the right decision. He wrote, "Some voices belong to the room they were built in, not to the stage they could have occupied." Clarence knew which room was his. He just needed Broadway to confirm it. Father Bernard's letter to his diocese superior is in the Catholic Diocese of Galveston-Houston archive. Arthur Pennington's note is in the possession of the mutual contact. The 1978 interview transcript is in the Houston Chronicle archive. 3 documents for a story that did not make the news at any point across its 40 years. Because it was not that kind of story. It was the kind where a man sings in a prison choir, and someone opens a door, and 3 years later a card is still being carried. And the thing that happens after is not fame. The thing that happens after is knowing. Knowing what the voice is worth, and choosing with full knowledge what to do with it. Clarence Whitfield chose Shiloh Baptist and sang there for 30 more years, having stood on Broadway first, so he could know what he was choosing.